Hi everyone, and welcome to the first of the Embassy's St. Bridget's Day events for this year. It's a really nice event to kick off our programme. We have a conversation with the women of Team Ireland in Canada. So these are women that I work with regularly and have the pleasure of getting to know during my time here. So it's a bit less of a formal chat and more of kind of an opportunity to learn more about their histories, their careers, and their own interests in the foreign policy and international sector. So just to introduce myself first, I'm Sally Bourne. I'm the second secretary in the Embassy of Ireland to Canada. I've been here since August of last year. I previously worked in our headquarters for about 2.5 years, and before that had a career in the nonprofit sector, which was really rewarding, working with both children and then women's rights programs. So next up we have Julie Connell. Julie is our Director of North America in the Department of Foreign Affairs. Julie's had a really interesting diplomatic career of about 25 years. She also has served on our management board in the Department of Foreign Affairs. She's worked in multilateral missions like the permanent representation of Ireland to the EU and to the UN, as well as bilateral work like on the North America desk, but also in the Embassy of Rome. So it's fantastic to have her here. Next up, we have Lydia Rogers. Lydia is here with us. She works in Enterprise Ireland as the country manager and the senior vice president for the Agri and Equine portfolios. Lydia came here also in 2021, but has been with Enterprise Ireland from 2018. Again, a really interesting and long career background in communications, marketing, and HR, and has previously worked with a number of companies on those kind of strategies, and particularly, I think, in the agriculture and kind of life sciences field. And last but certainly not least, Sandra Moffat from Tourism Ireland. Sandra moved to Canada in 2015 and came on board to Tourism Ireland in 2018 as business partner executive. I'm always unsure about these titles sometimes because it's not something I'm familiar with, but she has a good kind of background in design, media, digital marketing, and also business development. So it's really great to have her on board. Sandra moved from Dublin in 2020. She was then made the market manager for Tourism Ireland in Canada. So she leads on the strategy for promoting Canadian tourism to Canada and just promoting Ireland abroad here in North America. So it's great to have you all on board, and thanks so much for agreeing to come and chat to me today. I'm going to kick off with the first question, which is just, how did you get into your current career path? Was it kind of a straightforward route or a bit more of a roundabout one? I know mine was very roundabout, sort of accidentally fell into foreign affairs, but I guess there's a bit of a history there, but I think it's always interesting to hear more about that. So I might start with Julie, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Sally, and thanks for the introduction. Look, it's great to have a chat with you and the other colleagues on the Team Canada, our Team Ireland in Canada group that we have with us today. Look, a little bit about myself. As you said, I'm the director of the US-Canada unit in the Department of Foreign Affairs, currently based in Dublin. So I have a lot of contact with you and your colleagues in the embassy, and also we have established a relatively new consulate in Vancouver, and we're looking forward to setting up a new consulate in Toronto in summer 2022, which is really great and something we're really excited about. And it's taking up a lot of our time and efforts at the moment in a very positive way. Look, my own career, I started as in the diplomatic stream of the Department of Foreign Affairs a long, long time ago, and went, as you mentioned, to serve. My first posting overseas was to the embassy in Rome, which was a really great experience in a really important bilateral European mission. And then after serving time within our development international aid division for a number of years, I then spent time in Washington, DC, and also on postings to our embassy we call it a permanent representation of Ireland to the European Union. After 4 years working in our embassy to the European Union, I jumped ship and I went in to work for the European Commission. So I stayed in Brussels a little longer than most of our colleagues, and I was head of a cabinet there for the EU Special Representative for Human Rights for a number of years, who was a previous Greek foreign minister, and then Ireland's Eamon Gilmore took over the file, and I was head of his cabinet for a number of years before returning to Ireland in 2019, where, as you mentioned, I went on the board of the department for 2 years before taking up my current role. So look, it's been a very varied career, but look, we're a relatively small foreign ministry, and I think we don't allow for much specialization. You have to be able to roll in and roll up your sleeves literally on any file, and that's what I've kind of done and bounced around, having a lot of very different experiences, I suppose, but they've all been very rewarding and very stimulating. And again, I think it's one of the benefits of being in a small service, that you get exposed to a lot, and whatever you're able to contribute is always appreciated.
That's great. It's a really interesting, I think, history there, and it's always nice to hear, I guess, as somebody starting out in this career path, what kind of happens next and where you end up going to. So thanks for that, Julie. Sandra, how did you get into Tourism Ireland?
I've always worked in the tourism and travel sector in some kind of capacity. You know, I started working out in event management and marketing with Dublin Tourism while I was in school, you know, way back when, but it was never intended as a career then, right? I didn't necessarily have an ambition to work in travel when I was in university studying, you know, design and media and communications. But it did give me a taste of the industry, you know, and the opportunities within that. From there, from my small amount of exposure to that industry through, you know, a school job, I saw how much of an economic driver tourism was for Ireland, especially. You know, it employs over 325,000 people. And I wanted to develop my understanding of kind of how and why that could be built in a really sustainable way. You know, there was a lot of over-tourism, for example, in a lot of areas. And that led me down a path of working in business development, you know, for tourism businesses, both in Ireland and then kind of eventually here. And working in travel naturally lends itself to an international career. And that was a really big driver for me. I always wanted to work abroad in some capacity. And working internationally in the field then gave me the opportunity to see that industry from loads of different perspectives and from loads of different stakeholders, you know, from working with tourism businesses, working with the public sector, with private sector, you know, working with the Department of Foreign Affairs, Team Ireland here in Canada. You know, it's been really, really exciting. And I think, you know, I didn't intend working in travel. I think there's so many opportunities within travel, and the path in this industry will never necessarily be completely straightforward because there's so many different opportunities, and that's a really exciting thing.
That's great. Thanks so much, Sandra. And Lydia, how was it for you coming into state agencies and Enterprise Ireland in particular?
Yeah, I'm just fascinated listening to all of the other stories. It's so interesting. Probably a little bit like yourself, Sally, not very linear, not very straightforward. So prior to EI, I would have worked with predominantly two quite internationally focused companies, so a large agri-food business, and really got a lot of experience in quite a breadth of different roles there, from marketing, corporate comms, and then latterly head of HR. And then I worked with a really progressive equine startup and headed up their international commercial and marketing with the US as a kind of a priority market. So that was really interesting in terms of that diversity of experience. And then in 2018, got the opportunity to join Enterprise Ireland. And I guess that was just fascinating in that I came in an internal role, so as part of our organization development team, to set up a new internal communications function for the team globally, and was there about 3 years and just loved the remit of Enterprise Ireland, what we do, what we're trying to achieve for Irish enterprise, and so went for a competition last year for country manager for Canada and was successful in that. So really fascinating experience and just so interesting, and quite interesting to hear how Julie's career has spanned and just the number of postings and different opportunities. And I think that's exactly what kind of attracts people to Enterprise Ireland, is that just breadth of opportunity and diversity with 40 overseas offices.
Yeah, it's so true. I think for me, that was what drew me in as well. Was I'm not somebody that I think likes doing the same thing every day. So having the opportunity to constantly be moving and changing and learning, I think was something that the international field, I think, gives in a really great way, both in terms of your life and your work constantly. So yeah, the next question I have then is it's kind of based on a story I heard once. So I won't name the country involved because, you know, I do have to be diplomatic sometimes. But I heard this great story about a country that did an internal review of their policies, both domestic and international. And it was about kind of 2009-10. And they said, we have to really look at bringing women into our policies and into changing our policies, and that kind of their influence and their perspective. And, you know, a lot of the older men, I think, in a lot of these kind of areas working on policy weren't so sure about it. But one of them had a joke. So one of the areas was to do with snow. Funnily enough, it's not Canada, but it was to do with clearing snow. And in this country, every year they cleared the roads first. And they brought a woman onto the committee, and she said, well, why don't you clear the paths first? Because, you know, women and children, they mostly use the paths to get to work and to school. Some of them still cycle. So either clear the paths at the same time, or do them first? And so this country then changed that policy, and it just made a huge difference to the communities, to people's happiness over winter, and to productivity in the country, because women were getting to work on time. But I think that's a really interesting thing to always keep in mind, that there's such small changes in perspective that I think can have such a big difference overall in communities. So with that very long intro, my question is, what is an area of foreign policy or international trade or within the international sector that you've seen that you think has really been influenced by women's perspectives or engagement over the last few years? So it's a tricky question. I might start with Lydia. Sorry to go back to you so soon.
Answer that more broadly in terms of women's influence and leadership. And I think COVID has just been such a huge challenge, like societally, economically, just such a major challenge over time. And I think a huge amount can be learned from women leaders. So take Jacinda Ardern, take former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, take the Nordics actually, who were like trailblazers in terms of for women prime ministers. And actually Sweden, in fact, I think self-confessed first feminist government in the world, where they have a feminist trade policy, where they look at gender equality in trade agreements, look at mainstreaming in terms of standards, looking at gender equality in terms of the single market. So I think in general, actually having women participate in terms of local or national government, I think leads to an increase in terms of like policy making around advancing rights and promoting equality, and really I think improving quality of life in general. So I think probably more broadly from a women leadership perspective as necessarily in terms of international trade, but I do think we can definitely learn an awful lot from women leaders.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I think that kind of the nature of everything changing because you include women. When I was working in ActionAid, that was one of the things that, you know, we tried to do, is you bring kind of, I think, groups from one community to a community that has, I think, really engaged with the women of their community, really put them forward for educational and work opportunities, and the whole community benefit. So I think that's one thing that I always try to keep in mind. Sandra, what's your perspective on that question?
That was great answer from Lydia, I think, and I think I'm very similar thought and mindset behind that. You know, I think there's so much unique perspective and nuance when it comes to female leadership, and there's so much that we can learn. And I love that story that you shared as well, Sally. I think for Ireland, you know, in a more kind of granular way, you know, we're so strongly associated with our culture, you know, our art, our music. It's renowned, it's recognized all over the world, and women have a really strong influence in that space. You know, our most famous musicians, think of the chorus, Dolores O'Riordan, you know, her voice is so iconic. You've Sinead O'Connor, designers, you know, Sinead Burke, we've Orla Keeley, we've Louise Kennedy, we've all these people that resonate internationally. You know, they're leading women in their industries. And you can see the impact that has on trade, right? Like, it's also on a cultural appreciation for Ireland itself around the world. For a small country, we pack such a big punch. It's really, really impressive. And I think there's also some incredible female pioneers in a lot of industries that are really traditionally male dominated. You know, whiskey distilling always springs to mind for this. You know, Ireland leads the charge on this as well. I think it's surprisingly influenced by women in that space, but it's really unseen. You know, Ellen Corrigan more or less ran Bushmills Distillery. They have Helen Mulholland, she's a master distiller there. They have Alex Thomas, she's a master blender. And they have unique perspectives, unique profiling of the Irish whiskies that are, you know, dominant around the world in the food and beverage space. So I think women, while they might not be the dominant force in a lot of industries, there's a somewhat unseen influence, as I said, and it has a large impact on international trade in a way, and that's what's exciting to see.
That was such a lovely answer, and I love, I think, especially the naming of some of those women that, even though they might not necessarily be super in the spotlight, are quietly changing the course of these areas. So it's really, really nice to hear. And Julie, can I ask for your answer to that question?
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, I mean, just purely looking at it from my own experience through the prism of a diplomatic service and the delivery of foreign policy, I do think that traditionally women have stronger skills in the area of collaboration and bringing people together. I mean, of course, it's a little bit stereotypical, and not all women are like that, but there can be a real collaborative skill that women can bring. And certainly I would see a distinct area where we have brought that, really demonstrated that, is in the multilateral space. So when we operate within the UN or the EU, you can see where we have, in an Irish context, we have seen, really strong female leaders. So a number of years ago, we appointed Ireland's first ever female ambassador to the European Union in Brussels. And of course, politically, I think politicians and politically, elections and democracies are a little bit ahead of the curve, even though we're still one of the lowest rates of women in parliament in the whole of Europe and the developed world at 22%. But nonetheless, there have been a number of female ministers, but there hadn't been a female ambassador to the European Union. But what we didn't realise until our first female ambassador, Anne Anderson, turned up in Brussels, was that she was the first ever female ambassador of any of the 28 countries ever appointed as ambassador to the EU. And when she turned up on her first day, there was all the women who worked in the European Commission had lined the entryway into the building. So it really resonated in Brussels well beyond the Irish contribution. And then I think we are currently on the Security Council of the United Nations, where our ambassador there, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, has led our election campaign to get on the Security Council, which in itself was a massive feat. And maybe I should mention that, Sally, because we did beat Canada to get the spot around the table, who we work very well and in collaboration with now that we're there. Yeah. and both Anne Anderson, after her time in Brussels, she became the first female ambassador to the United States in Washington for Ireland. And Geraldine Byrne-Nason now, when she finishes in New York next summer, will again follow Anne's footsteps and become the second female Irish ambassador accredited to the United Nations or to the United States. So you're seeing there certain patterns, but look, the reality is those women are special because they are in the minority at that level. I mean, let's be honest about it. I think our Foreign Ministry has done a lot the last few years, I would say even the last 10, 12 years, to try and push for more gender equality. We recently had the first ever 50% female ambassadorial appointments in our annual, a round of appointments of ambassadors globally. And it's the first time we had more than 50% women in that package. Traditionally, diplomatic services and the obligation to serve abroad has been less popular with females than with males, and that's something that even the Nordics have struggled with. So it's not just us, but it is an uphill battle, but it's something that we're working towards, and we really see some huge benefits in having just diversity and a diplomatic service that represents the population across the board.
It's a great answer. And I think it kind of leads on to a question that I might ask Lydia and Sandra, which is, what's the change that you've seen in your organization in the last few years that's made you really optimistic about, I guess, kind of the future of women in your organization? I know for the department, there have been these big changes, there's these kind of landmark events, but also, we've had some great internal policies around maternity leave and other kind of initiatives to promote more inclusion and, I guess, women being able to balance that sense of family and other commitments and their career, which maybe has been a bit less important previously. So I might start with Lydia on that question.
Yeah, I think for Enterprise Ireland, Sally, women in business in general has been a real priority agenda item, and we have made some progress. I think over recent years, if we take 2020, I think over 40% of companies under what we call our competitive start fund were for women-led businesses. Last year, about 25% of our high potential startups included a woman founder. And I think last October, Enterprise Ireland was listed as the #1 VC in all of Europe by deal count in terms of female founders that have been supported over recent years. So I think we put a focus on trying to support women in business. We've launched a new 6-year strategy back in 2020. And just last year actually launched a new project called the Level Project. And that's really kind of trying to support Irish enterprise, look at their leadership team and look at the gender balance on it. And what I would say is there's still an awful lot to do. Internally actually as well. Prior to me coming out to Canada, I would have been involved in coordinating a new program, so a leadership development for women program in the semi-states with Dublin City University. And so we piloted that back in, 2019. There was 4 colleagues from Enterprise Ireland and a number from across the different semi-states as well. And that has run each of the couple of years since then. But actually interesting, myself and the other 3 participants from Enterprise Ireland who were on that original pilot all have since changed roles. So 2 have gotten promotions, 2 of us have moved laterally. So it's really to go for roles and to really step out of your comfort zone and actually take on new opportunities.
Yeah, it's doing a lot, but that's a great answer as well.
And actually, Sally, I might just say as well that, like, I think from an equality perspective, we talk a lot about gender, but there's so much more. And I think we've still a lot of work to do in the overall diversity and inclusion space. So whether that's, disability, a physical or an invisible disability, whether it's sexual orientation, race, whatever, I think we've a ways to go yet in terms of how we actually support diversity and inclusion.
Great, yeah. And I guess, just to add to Julie's points as well, like it's interesting that you mentioned both what Enterprise Ireland is doing externally as well as internally. I think the department has really strong initiatives going on, both in the development space, but just in the foreign policy space in terms of including women's perspectives, but also really guarding things like women's education, women's rights abroad, which is something that we continue to do. And I think that also has a positive influence internally. I think when your organization really works to promote those activities outside, it really kind of changes the perspectives of people inside that organization, and really I think allows for more space for women to speak up and women to be involved in those changes. So Sandra, I might ask you about Tourism Ireland.
I think internally in Tourism Ireland, female leadership is really well represented. We're very lucky in that perspective. Our board of directors, for example, really showcases gender equality. It's over 50% female. We also have female representation in our senior management team, 1 out of 4 there, and so many leadership roles across the organization are held by women, in North America, in Europe, but also in our emerging markets in Dubai and Asia. So I think that's really exciting to see. I think externally, working with a lot of our partners, we're also seeing that. We're seeing a lot of movement with female leadership into a lot of these companies, which is really, really great to see. And something that I've seen partners promote quite a lot is, focus on inclusivity and with gender specifically, for example, the promotion of, safe female solo travel. And that's been a big trend kind of in the travel space over the last couple of years. So that's great. But I think Lydia made a really great point on diversity and inclusion, and there is so much more to it than gender, right? And I think there is a lot of work to be done in a lot of other areas as well. Accessibility, for example, if you're looking at Ireland, I think does need a lot of improvement and a lot of work. So I think, well, it's great, we're doing fantastic, but there is a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. And I think one thing going forward is there's always sectors that I think every organization can be looking at more or trying to be more inclusive of. But now I think we're becoming much more aware of intersectionality as well, which is that kind of crossroads of different areas of I guess equality that we need to look at and make sure that, there are these different hierarchies of how people are treated and how people are brought in. So I think that's something that, will probably be the next steps, especially in Ireland. I think we've done a lot in terms of the gender inclusivity and in terms of that kind of equality, but I think there's definitely still work to be done, as everyone's mentioned, but also I think work to be done in that intersectionality space as well when it comes to women. So it's really interesting to hear those perspectives. Julie, I'm conscious that you have to go soon, so I'm going to ask you my last difficult question, which is, what do you think is going to be the most interesting trend in your field over the next kind of 5 years? Obviously for the two of us, that's going to be diplomacy. So what do you see as the most interesting trend there?
I think maybe in regard to gender, you mean,
or in general?
I think in general, I think that the impact of COVID has left us with a lot of very big unanswered open questions about diplomacy and how we do our work and how we engage. We have 94, we've opened up a radical, 26 new offices in recent years. We've 94 offices in the field now. And, what we do with this vast network, in an Irish context is really open. There's a lot of things that I suppose working virtually, we've shown we don't need people in the field to achieve. So I think we really are going to have to step up and justify our added value to the Irish public and to the Irish taxpayer for what we do and what we can achieve. And I think actually to do that, we're going to have to evolve pretty radically. And I think a diplomatic service, by its very nature, it's a government department. So it's about as conservative a structure that as you get, you know, and it's very slow to move. Now, when it moves like a dinosaur and it moves for good. But I think it's going to be a bit of a battle to maybe modernize, I suppose, in line with the impact of COVID on how we do our business, what we do, what services we provide to our citizens, and how those demands are also going to shape, you know, the needs and demands of our citizens have been shaped by the impact of COVID, and we need to kind of step into that space. I think, you know, as an organization shapes and it's evolving quite radically, I think in the next few years, there's real opportunity then to reshape an organization to ensure that it's fit for purpose in the area of diversity, and that it's I think a government department and the face of government overseas has an imperative more than any other organisation to reflect the population that it's supposed to represent. And as the population of Ireland has evolved so much in recent years, I think we can take as an opportunity the evolution of our own organisation to ensure that that diversity is reflected. I think particularly for women, again, there's a lot of very arcane and heavy structures that are there. I literally, when I hear the centenary of the foundation of the state, Sally and I live with systems that were brought in under circulars of the British government. So we really know and live this in a way that is, you know, it's something that all civil servants have. And I think we're going to see pretty fast and radical evolution. And I think there's real opportunities there for us to assert what are our needs. And fundamentally, women, we've seen in all our research, is not only that they're more reluctant to go abroad, but they are more risk averse in general about going abroad, you know, particularly over the age of 30. That's all our research shows us that. And I think we need to build in, you know, reassurance and about career development and about supports that they get in order to see a long-term career in a diplomatic service, which is something that for many women, they don't do. Like I came in with 15 women when I joined a long time ago. We came in as a group together, and there's only 2 of us left. And most of the 13 who left moved to other parts of the Irish public sector. So, you know, but they clearly saw that other parts of the public sector were more suitable for them and just getting more flexibility about their life choices. And I think that's something, at the end of the day, it's a market. And if we want the best people, male, female, black, white, you know, we need to get out there and fight for them. And I think the impact of COVID, I believe, presents really good opportunities in that space, but we have to be pretty swift and modernize pretty fast, which is something that it's hard for us to do, and it's going to be a big challenge. But it's exciting too. And you know, next week is the first week we're going back to the office 1 day a week, so we're all very excited about you know, showering and putting on makeup and that kind of thing. So I think that's all for the good.
That's a really, really fantastic answer. And just thank you so much for it. It's always nice to hear those perspectives. I think, you know, for me as well, coming into the department, it was such an interesting journey, but I think being here as well has made me think about, you know, my own identity. And my mother is Sri Lankan. And so, you know, I come to the Irish Foreign Service, but I come from a mixed background. And I think representing that in Canada has been particularly special, you know, working in such a diverse place and really representing what I think modern Ireland is in modern Canada. So I think, you know, hoping to see more of that and capitalize on building on that diversity, like you said, Julie, is really important and really exciting. Julie, I know you have to run off, so if you want to head off, feel free to whenever. And thank you so much for joining us today. I might then ask Lydia what you think the next kind of the most important trends and the most interesting trends coming up in your field of work might be.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question. And actually, Enterprise Ireland, just in the last couple of weeks, we've only launched our new strategy up to 2024, and it's entitled Leading in a Changing World. And I think it's just so apt because of the pace of change is changing and accelerating all the time. And as Julie mentioned, the impact of COVID, geopolitics, Brexit, technology is a huge piece. So I think the whole area of digitalization is really significant. One in particular area, I would say, around sustainability. I think climate action is going to be fundamental, underpinning business, underpinning society and policy decisions as we kind of look towards decarbonisation and net zero. And I think so there will be challenges within that, but I think it will also create opportunities particularly for Irish business within the green economy. The other thing actually that I would say around trends is like our workplace, and Julie referenced, you know, the workplace, and I think having a modern workplace and even learning from COVID, I think people are much more cognizant now of quality of life, of work-life balance. We've all heard at length about the Great Resignation, but I think workplaces are changing, and that access to skills and labour, I think there will be an increase in remote and hybrid working, which in effect will have an impact on climate and sustainability agenda as well, if you're not commuting 5 days a week. So yeah, I think definitely climate, sustainability, digitalization are key trends for the years ahead.
Great. Yeah. I think those are all the things that I'm thinking about now. And I think, you know, particularly changing the way we work. I think, you know, it's sometimes really interesting to me that I think a lot of these trends go hand in hand with, you know, women's influence and women's kind of impact on policy, like things like more flexibility in terms of the way you work, being more sustainable in those commutes and in that travel, you know. So I think it'll be interesting to see going forward. And Sandra, how about tourism? I know that you've done a lot of work in these kind of alternative spaces, which is really nice, you know, talking about female solo travel, talking about ecotourism, and those kind of areas. So yeah, what do you see?
I think the whole travel industry has been particularly affected by COVID and the pandemic, and everything's been flipped on its head. You know, even the way we've been traveling over the last 2 years, you know, business travel just has been non-existent. You know, not only not traveling to your office, but people obviously were going overseas. But I think just to pick up on the sustainability point, that's a bit of a passion point of mine, but I think that's really come to the fore over the last couple of years, you know, in the travel context, and, you know, carbon emissions and air travel most specifically. And only recently, I think it was last month, Europe has made some big moves in that space, right? Like governments are imposing bans on short haul flights under 2.5 hours. So, you know, France is leading the charge on that. Spain are looking at it, Germany, some Scandinavian countries as well. And, you know, think of if that came into effect here in Canada, what a massive impact that would have. You know, people fly to Ottawa, you don't necessarily get the train travel is very expensive. So I think there's a lot around that. I think we're really going to see a lot of bigger commitments to both measuring and improving sustainability in the travel space. I'm really looking forward to that part of the conversation, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's long overdue. And if any positive came out of COVID and the pandemic, I think hopefully this will be it.
That's great. Yeah, I think, you know, just adding to that, we are obviously going to have to look at the value add, as Julie mentioned, of, you know, do people necessarily need to travel all the time? And for diplomacy, you know, digital diplomacy has been such an interesting part of that. But I think it's really been beneficial in another way, because we can have Julie on this call, even though she's based in Dublin, and, you know, there's not necessarily the expense or the environmental impact of bringing people out for some things and still getting to have these really interesting conversations. You're both based in Toronto, so it would have taken me a long time on the train to get to Toronto, but it's great to have these conversations. That's, I think, all the questions that I'm going to ask you for today, but I just wanted to say thank you both so much for joining me and for having this conversation. It was really interesting. I really enjoyed getting to know more about you and your thoughts on your own industry. So yeah, thanks again.
Sally, thanks a million. Really delighted to participate, and thanks Sandra as well for sharing all your insights.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to have this conversation, I think, and yeah, it's always great to be part of Team Canada, Team Ireland here in Canada as well. So yeah, great to hear everyone's perspectives.
Thanks again.